Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Scoop TV. We have a very special guest from Bay Area with us today, Miss Ann Ravel. She's running for state senate in California. So we'd like to know more about her and her views and her perspectives on many other topics. So welcome to the show, Miss Ann Ravel. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you very much for inviting me to the show. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Can you help us out in understanding your early career and how you started your education and then your career and then got into the politics? I would really appreciate if you can elaborate a little more on those things and especially in your experience at APC too, please.
Yes. Oh, I'd love to. So we moved to San Jose when I was about 11 and had lived in Latin America, and my mother is a Latin American immigrant. And I went to school here and then to Berkeley, graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in philosophy, which gave me a lot of job opportunities. And then, and then I decided to go to law school because I've always been passionate about doing things for the community. And so graduated from law school, started practicing in San Jose, and did a couple of pro bono cases. One of them ended up going all the way to the United States Supreme Court after I'd already left, because that's what made me decide to go into public service. And that was a case having to do with the ability of some young people to get petitions signed at a shopping mall in San Jose. And I lost when I tried that case, but the Supreme Court, California and US Supreme Court, reversed it and said that people have a right to their First Amendment rights in a private area like a shopping mall. And so that was it. Fought it hard, but eventually we won that as well. And now paint companies have had to pay for remediation. And because of some of these cases that I did, the Obama administration took note of what I had done and asked me to go oversee the consumer litigation at the beginning of the Obama administration, which you might remember was right after a really big recession caused by banks and Wall Street and things like that. And so I worked on a couple of cases, including the Big Short case, if you ever saw that movie. That was my case. I started that case at the Department of Justice, as well as a number of the oil spill in the Gulf. But I found slow, hard to get things done quickly there. And Governor Brown asked me to go to the California Fair Political Practices Commission, where I was the chair. I did come home. And which was to go after dark money, which is money where you don't know the source. A lot of money came into a California election a couple weeks before the election. And I went after them immediately through litigation that went to the California Supreme Court in a week and a half and forced them to turn over the information. And it turned out it was $16 million, and it was at Koch brothers committees. And so I became kind of well known for that. And as a result, President Obama asked me to go back to DC to be commissioner of the Federal Election Commission, which turned out to be an interesting experience because there are 6 commissioners by law, no more than 3 of one political party. And it had a really big impact on the behavior, let's put it that way. I realized how polarized Washington, D.C. is. Not that we didn't know that to begin with, but it infiltrated down to federal agencies like this that are supposed to be independent. And so for me, as a public servant, the idea that you were not going to enforce the law to actually give information to the public about who's behind political campaigns was an anathema. And so I started to speak out about it publicly, and had op-eds in the New York Times, and they covered me as well. And so I became pretty well known, on one side not liking me very much, but pretty well known for being outspoken about what I consider almost like consumer law. It's protecting people, and people have a right to know. People have a right to know about what's going on in government, and they have a right to know about who's trying to influence their behavior.
So very nice. I mean, so you were experienced at FEC, and we have been hearing even today, in spite of having many laws, and we still see the many ways to get the money to the campaign, and those kind of things. I've never seen saw a short video in the Hollywood. I mean, one of the actress. I mean, she interviewed another. I mean, by a lawyer, and they were talking about how they can. I mean, get the money into the campaign funding. That's a different topic. So,
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
it's true. It's true. There's so many ways to get money, and people don't know about it, and people don't know really who's trying to influence them. It's really unfortunate. There's so many holes in the law.
yeah, we see them at a lower level, at the city council level itself. I mean, a lot of realtors will be pitching in, and then they try to get some favors and the zoning and all those things. And and we look at the other things. I mean, when you come to the state representatives and state senate and Congress, they get into different ball games. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, there are many things. I mean, what do you think? I mean, any drastic changes will come in FEC? I mean, very anytime soon, or will it be the same? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I do believe that it isn't solely one party or another that benefits from money in politics. There is no question about that. It's not reserved just for the Republicans as opposed to the Democrats. And so that makes it problematic. But I do think that if the Senate changes after this election in 2020, there is a strong possibility, because people are now really concerned about the money that is funneled through from places like Russia, for example. And we know that Russia intervened in the election, and not just by falsehoods and propaganda and trying to divert the vote, but also there is money that is funneled through on the internet. And so I think that there is some hope that the FEC can be reformed. And there's a number of bills that have been proposed and are, either waiting or agreed to in Congress, but the Senate has been unwilling to take them up.
Gotcha. I understand. I'll come back to this topic another day with your time, and then we can talk a little more on those things. I mean, today's agenda is to know more about you and your perspective and your views on some of the issues which are happening in the country, and you're running for the state senate in California. So we'd like to talk more about this particular race, and then we can come back to FEC another day with your permission, for sure. Okay, thank you. Yeah. We would like to know. So, I mean, right now, the whole world. I mean, many countries, except few countries, a handful of countries. I mean, rest of the world is gripped with the COVID-19 pandemic. So, what is your view on the way it is in California and how it has been handled and how it is in the overall in the US? So, what do your views and your perspective on the COVID-19 handling of COVID-19, both at state level and the federal level?
Yes. Well, it's really important, as I said, for government to be transparent and to be telling people the truth. And when you look at world leaders, you see those world leaders who have done a really good job versus the ones who have not. And mostly their qualities have been they've been truthful. They're talking about what they know and what they don't know, and they're doing it clearly about why certain remedies need to be done just because we want to avoid risk to the rest of the community. And, they're empathetic. I mean, obviously, this is a difficult time for everybody, and people are losing their jobs. It's having an impact on the economy. And that's where the United States has failed, because as we know, the president hasn't deployed resources and didn't early on when he could have for testing. He's made all kinds of statements about the virus as if it is really from China and that it's all their fault. And that has given rise to a lot of hate and violence on the internet that is being concentrated on Asian Americans, which is ridiculous. So all of those things together, I think that the federal government has really failed. In California and locally, pretty much where I live, Santa Clara County was one of the first places where the health officer came to the conclusion that we had to shelter in place. And I think that all of those actions were good. But what ultimately ended up happening was there were inconsistencies about who they applied to. And it started to become a real economic problem for people because small businesses are closing. It's not so bad for large businesses, but small businesses that employ people were closing. And the virus was still impacting mostly people who are low income, or Latinos in my neighborhood, in my area, have a much higher incidence of COVID than others. And I think that the inconsistencies caused people here to feel that the regulations, that the orders were not fair and not rational. Because, for example, I had a woman call me and say she worked at a small nursery near where I live, and they had to close down. And she was driving down the street and saw that there was a Home Depot with a nursery out in front, and there were all kinds of people in it. And that was allowed to stay open. When things like that happen, people lose trust. They lose faith. They feel that they're being unfairly targeted and that there's no rationale for the distinctions. And I think that that has been a serious problem locally and at the state. And I know Governor Newsom has had a lot of pressure to open, and he opened up, and then there were more cases, and people began to feel that there was no, rationale, no thought, no science behind what was being done. And I just think that it's can be done better by their leaders speaking out and being absolutely honest about every decision and why it's being made.
Gotcha. That's a. I mean, I know. I mean, you have mentioned. I mean, how they've handled it initially. The California, the stay home order kind of helped a little bit in bending the curve, and but of late, I mean, the numbers are going up, and hopefully things will come back to some kind of under control. Let's hope for that. But same as you mentioned rightly, the small example you quoted, a small nursery has an impact on their business. Like that, there are many other small businesses, restaurants, retail stores, or many of the small stores have had a hard time. I mean, it's been like more than like March, April, May, June, July, August. We are close to 6 months now. I mean, it was half of a half year. Without revenue, much revenue, it's very hard for any business to survive. So, what do you see? What do you foresee for the small businesses in the near future and the long term? What do you think of that is a core? A core engine for the U.S. economy. So, what are your views on that?
Yes, well, I think you're absolutely right. It has had a devastating impact on small businesses, but lots of restaurants, but lots of other very small businesses that now can't operate at all. I mean, one of the groups, salons, hair salons, barbers, all of those, and that's where a lot of people are employed, as well as the people who are running the businesses, as you say. I mean, those people sometimes are really close to not being able to make their rent payments, and now they can't at all. I mean, that's the margin of how much money they make versus what it costs for them to actually stay in business. So I really do believe that the state government and hopefully the federal government, which did a really bad job of the PPP loans and who they went to. But I think that small business has to be a priority in trying to shore up the ability for people to continue to operate, because unless they get assistance, people are talking about assistance for renters, for example, but there's no difference with small businesses. They too have to pay their rent and can't continue to do it. And so I think that these are things that the state and the federal government need to take really seriously in providing more assistance to businesses so they can continue to operate, and to look at the health advisories and laws and regulations. And I don't disagree. Everyone has to be healthy for people to continue in business, but they need to look at them very carefully to assure that you can find ways to make people be healthy in certain environments, and do both if possible. So for sure, I am very strongly in the view that small business for us, I live in a small town. That's what there is here. There aren't any or very many large companies that are here. It's small businesses, and it's devastating. And it's devastating to the community. So we absolutely need to do tax credits and other ways of helping so that they can continue to exist.
So, yeah, thanks for your views on this particular topic. In general, if you look at the California, when you talk about the California and especially Bay Area, we know, we all talk about the multi-billion and a market cap of $1 trillion kind of companies are there. And even the jobs are also high-paying jobs. But at the same time, we see there are two different categories. One is, middle class and high middle class, and another is the when you talk about retail and small business, I don't think they will be making as much as the people who are making in the uh, companies, large corporations. So there is a huge gap, and that gap is been widening. For last, few decades, I would say 10 to 20 years. So with all these things, how do you see if you are elected to the office, the state senate? So what kind of measures what kind of policies do you like to propose to help the low income people especially in the Bay Area?
Well, there's a few of them. And, with regard to small businesses, for example, I do believe that we could give some forgivable loans to small businesses so that they can expand. and maybe do go into other areas. They can change. Restaurants can use the money to have people outside and things like that. For employees, for one thing, we know a lot of people have lost their jobs and are going to continue to lose their jobs. That's just clear. And those jobs may never come back. So what we have to do is expand training programs that are free so that people can learn new skills and find jobs, maybe in the tech sector. I mean, I do live in Silicon Valley. And as you're right, those companies are still doing just fine. And people are working from home and it's working out well for them, but not for the rest of the population. Because people who actually worked in some of those companies, who worked as cafeteria workers and other things, more frontline kind of workers, they've all lost their jobs. So I do think that we have to emphasize retraining, whether it be through community colleges, through trade schools, through other infusions of money that the state can put towards making sure that people can succeed in some other profession. So I think that that's a really important way to help people. But I also do believe that we have to make sure that there's some sort of jobless help, that we give to people, because it's not really going to abate anytime soon. It's going to take some time. And so we've got to have these relief programs that will help people and not let the low income fall behind. I also do believe that California can invest, and we're going to have economic issues as well, no question, at the state level. But California can invest in a green economy, and I'm not saying just Green New Deal, but there are a lot of things that we can invest in that we've already started to look at and invest in California, and we can continue to do that in a way that can then employ more people. And it's a win-win. It's better for the state, and it's better for people to get new jobs.
Gotcha. I mean, you brought in a very good point. I mean, you have to retrain the resources we have and then put them back into the jobs, which is a good point, and hopefully things will work out. But if on the same note, if you look at the California. It is good that I mean California is able to attract positive number of people into the state. But if you look at the businesses side, many businesses are moving out of California because of the high taxes and
Right.
the labor laws, those kind of things. So how do you balance? I mean, one side you're losing the businesses from California, and other side you have more of people looking for jobs. So what are the measures or what policies would like to bring it to the table? I know you'll not be able to change it by just one person. I mean, you need, I mean, a Senate and House and the governor to agree to those things. So we understand that one, but whatever your ideas to improve or
Yeah.
make the country stay back. Sorry.
Well, and you raise a really good point, because California, the taxes are so high, and every time you turn around, people are suggesting higher taxes on business and higher taxes on individuals as well. I know even I'm at the county, and the local county board of supervisors were considering an additional tax, for social services tax. Well, there are really situations. I mean, Santa Clara County has some of the highest tax, and this would be not an income tax or a property tax. This would just be a sales tax, and that really affects everybody. And it's such a high tax that it's crazy. I mean, low income people couldn't afford it either. So you're right. And a lot of the reasons why people are leaving is one, the taxes, but also there's a really high cost of living here because of housing. And in part, that's because of some of the, what you mentioned was the large tech companies that pay their employees, even, young kids that just start in, so much money that the housing market, they're willing to pay whatever it is to get housing, and that leaves most people out of the equation, like teachers and firefighters and baristas and all the people who you want in your community can't live here. And so I really do agree that those are the things we need to look at. We do need to try to increase housing so that housing is less expensive, so some people can afford affordable housing and the living costs of being here, because even rentals are through the roof. So that's one thing that I think we really have to look at seriously, because that is one of the major reasons that a lot of people move. But businesses also shouldn't be the target. I firmly believe businesses have to be regulated, that to make sure that they're not cheating their consumers, that they're following the laws of health and not selling toxic things to people and the rest. But businesses aren't in social services. It's not their job to bear some of the burdens that the state government has been putting on them, to make sure that their employees get certain things. I mean, I think in certain ways they have that responsibility to be fair and to their employees, but I think it's a social services pretty much, in my view, that is the government's job. And so the government needs to make sure that all our policies will balance those things, to make sure that there's fairness, equality, and justice, and fair pay and benefits for their employees, but for the employees of the state, but also to encourage business to stay. And so not to put undue burdens on them.
Gotcha. No, we got your views on this particular topic. I mean, but yeah, there is a lot of conflicting theory, I would say. I mean, you're right. I mean, businesses should not be penalized, but at the same time, I mean, state has to have to get the implement the social or welfare scheme. You need the money. So where will you get the money? I mean, money should come from the people, or the businesses. So to implement this thing,
Exactly.
so it is kind of a little catch 20. I mean, yeah, it you have to be. I don't know how to resolve this particular thing. Either you tax them directly, or they have to take care of themselves. I mean, one way or the other, somebody has to pay for it. So,
Right.
if you want to comment on
Yeah,
it, you can
no.
comment on it. We can move on to something else. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I also think, I mean, I'm a strong believer in government accountability, and I also think we need to do a thorough review of all the state agencies and what's being prioritized now, where the money is going, which I don't think has been done. Because I mean, we know, I mean, California is the fifth largest economy in the world. We have a really giant state, and lots of agencies where money has been allocated, and nobody's really looking to make sure that, except when there's a scandal of some sort, but nobody's looking to make sure that that money is being spent precisely the way it should be spent, and or whether or not those priorities are still priorities given the world that we're in today, and whether we should redirect some of that money to other uses. So I think that would be one way also. I mean, admittedly, taxing is obviously the mechanism, but that would be one way to free up some money. The other way, the state legislature has come up with an idea of having people prepay their taxes. and get some sort of benefit from that long term, vouchers and the like, and that will be an infusion of money into the state. Whether that's going to be reasonable or a useful way to do this is questionable, but
I got. Okay, that's good. That's fair enough. So coming back to the California, and also you brought up, I mean, another thing, another topic, the health issue. The pandemic has thrown a light on how our healthcare system is and how our insurance and healthcare. So, what are your views on healthcare in the U.S. and especially in the California area, where with the high cost of living, you mentioned the cost of living is very high. I mean, housing and the renting. On top of it, insurance is also very high. An average insurance for a family would be at least the minimum is $1,000,
right.
around $1,000. So, what are your views on healthcare and that?
Yes, and I know it's interesting that people say that it has shown a light, the COVID, on the fact of healthcare disparities. But in fact, I think that it's been kind of obvious, but nobody was looking. And now we know that whatever happens to somebody, if somebody gets sick who is, working in a grocery store and they're being laid off and don't have any money for being no insurance, we're going to get sick. So we now all realize that it's intertwined. I really do believe that one of the ways to expand this would be to try to push to make sure that under the Affordable Care Act, there is a government option. I know that having, people want Medicare for all, and I'm not sure either that's going to be something that's going to happen. That you need the federal government to go along with that idea. And frankly, I think we could more quickly have a situation under the Affordable Care Act where you can expand it with more Medicaid, and you can expand it with an option that also does have government provided care. And that would be, I think, the ideal solution, as well as expanding Medi-Cal and other ways of making sure that we have a large number of people who work in the fields, not that far from where we are, who are not citizens, but many of them do not have access to any medical care. They're working with our food. I mean, seriously, they should have medical care. And so expanding Medi-Cal to everyone so that everyone has access to care, I think, is really important. And also what has become obvious during this time is that we have lots of people who are having mental health crises, and we do not have sufficient coverage of mental health care either, which needs to be done. It needs to all be included.
Very nice. I mean, hopefully these things will improve and then will be affordable to many people in the community. Let us hope for that. And you have mentioned, see, when you talk about the underprivileged, I mean, people. I'm not the underprivileged. I would say the people with the low income. Uh, so, I mean, for that, I mean, if you look at any play anywhere in the world, I mean, the one way to get out of that particular loop or cycle is education is one important thing. I mean, if you have a good education, probably there is a way you can uh, come out of that particular loop and then get into the higher income bracket. So, what is your view on the education in the Bay Area and especially in California? Even though California is a technologically advanced state, but the schools are not that they are not in the top. I mean, in the U.S. And so, what are your views on these school systems in California? And then, how do you see what kind of proposals do you want to bring to the table to improve the education system in California? That is very important in the Bay Area, especially the where you live.
Right. Yes, it's really disconcerting because when I grew up here, I went to, as I told you at the beginning, all public schools and all the way through law school. And they were affordable and they were really good schools. And, I always say to people that I was so lucky that time period because we came from a very, middle class family. My mother didn't work, didn't have that much money, but I was able to go to school and ultimately appointed by the President of the United States. And now what? Is that happening for people? No. And I think part of the problem is the financing of schools in California is inconsistent, and it particularly does not benefit low-income communities. And as a result, financing of those schools, they get much less money than the ones in, say, Palo Alto or places where there are more wealthy people. And the other problem is, of course, also that many of the more seasoned teachers don't want to go into those communities to teach. And it ends up being that many of the teachers in those more economically disadvantaged communities have little experience to teach kids who maybe come from homes where they are still, English language learners, all of the things that make it much harder to teach them. And so I believe that whole system needs to be revamped and there needs to be more effort to make sure that those kids get the same kind of education from better teachers, more experienced teachers as everyone else. Clearly, money is an issue, although, the reality is that a lot of money does go to the schools, but a large percentage of it goes to teacher retirements. And my view about that would be to change the funding process so that the money for retirements stays with the retirement system, which is a state retirement system anyway, and that's where the money goes. And when the money goes to the schools, it's for the kids. It's not for retirement. It's not for building. It's for the kids. And I think that's one of the issues that we have, is that money is being utilized, not the fault of the schools necessarily, but for purposes that should not be part of the equation, in my opinion. So I think a lot of this will come from changing the funding processes and how it's done, but also with an emphasis on teacher creativity. And maybe there's something about the educational process in California about teaching that needs to be changed.
Gotcha. I think that's a very good point. I mean, at the same time, I mean, there is one more on the education issue itself in California. I think House has passed the bill. I'm not sure exactly the affirmative action. I mean, the repealing the 209. So, what are your views on that? And especially the kind of place where you are is a kind of do you have a mixed demographics? I mean,
Right.
some groups are against that because of their own because of their situation, and then some groups will be for that. So what are your views on this?
Yeah. I believe in affirmative action, but I think a lot of people don't understand it the way I understand it, because they feel like that means that if someone is more qualified to get into a university, say, but then there is a person of color, for example, that the person of color will get in and the more qualified person won't. That is not what affirmative action actually means. And I can tell you why I know this, because, number one, I got my first job because of affirmative action at the county. because they had just started an affirmative action plan, and I started working at the county council's office, and it was me and another woman, and there were about 30 men that I would say you would be safe if you just called them all Bob. And so, that was only because of affirmative action that I got that sort of extra boost. So, and then when I was there, I tried the very last case on affirmative action, and it was affirmative action also for women at the county. And it was decided by the Supreme Court in 1987. And it's called Johnson versus Transportation Agency. And it approved a sex-based affirmative action plan. And what the court said was, it's an issue that you take into account, just like you take into account other things. When you are admitting this was for jobs, not education, but nonetheless. And it is not the sole criteria that you allow people in. It's when people are relatively in the same, say for a job, and you're looking at two people, and there has been a history of discrimination. There's a evidence that it's being underrepresented and has been underrepresented, and it's a temporary fix. It's not like something that is going to go on forever once there's more equality in the workforce. And I think the same thing applies to schools. There have been ways also already of doing affirmative action in a sense in California by saying that they will take the top 10% of students at schools throughout the state, and that is one way that the state has been able to get that diversity. And this will just be a slightly different way, and it's not going to penalize people. It's not going to make it so that certain groups can't get in, because frankly, I know a lot of Asians are concerned in my area that it's going to impair their kids' ability to get into schools. But in fact, a lot of Asian Americans have suffered discrimination. Many of them are low income. It's not like they're a different classification. I think it would be applicable as well to them as it is to anybody else.
Okay. So, you said, it's not going to impact, when you said, so do you think there will be more number of seats or more number of positions in the job or in the college? Is that what you're saying this affirmative action will be doing? Or let us say if you have 100 seats in Stanford, so when you bring in affirmative action, do you think the seats will go up, or will it be the same?
Well, that's, hard to say. It's probably going to be the same. But in my view, I think what's going to happen is if there were only 2 seats, then yeah, there might be that evidence of one group being treated differently. But we know now, personally, this is just showing my terrible bias here, but personally, I know that at Stanford, for example, if you have parents that went to Stanford, if you're a legacy, if you've given a lot of money to Stanford, if you are going to be a great star football player, that you're going to also get in. And so there are so many ways that the number of seats get diminished for people who really are qualified to get in. And so I think, all of those things need to be remembered and taken into account, that frankly, those things should also just be, and I've had this argument with my husband because we went to Berkeley, and he goes, well, the football team brings in a lot of money to the school. And I said, yeah, I know, but why would those people be more qualified to get in than someone else? I mean, that just makes no sense to me at all. And so I don't think, I think people should be, they should be getting in for the purpose of making the community well-rounded, but for people who they think are going to be able to do the work, learn it, be great, productive members of our society. And that's really, the
I
key.
got I totally understand the need for the extra boost or extra support for the people who need it. I mean, which is totally understand, especially in the scenario here we are talking about the African Americans and the Latino Americans, no doubt about it. But I mean, don't you think, in the earlier topic you mentioned that I mean the school teachers are not willing to go to those areas, and I mean the reason is usually if you look at a football game as you mentioned, I mean the coach would be interested in the kid, I mean, who is doing very well. I mean, he would like to take that guy and then groom him well and make him a NFL star or a star player or MVP player, those kind of things. And the same way, teachers are also they get motivated only people who are working well. So coming back to the point, I mean, probably so. Don't we see a need of creating a equal platform at the primary level? Like I mean. At the pre-K to the elementary level.
Yes.
Probably if you address that one, probably rest of the things will stay same. Will help. I mean, level same level playing field. We see the difference. I mean, people at the low beginning they lose out. They get distracted, and as you go along, I mean, the gap will be widened. So probably, my view, I mean, we need to fix it at the very beginning stage rather than at the top level.
Yes. I don't disagree at all. I think that that is the key. That's the really important place to go because, frankly, I think it starts in when children are babies. It starts with childcare, affordable quality childcare. It starts with preschool and then goes through the elementary and high school years. No question about it. It's really important that that's where we devote our resources. I don't disagree in at all. That is really the way to achieve true equality and justice in our society. But sometimes even that though, when there's historic problems of discrimination, as we've seen, and there were for women. When I started practicing, there were hardly any women in law, and there was definitely historic discrimination. And I and many of the women who are my contemporaries can tell probably weeks of stories about them. But even in the courts, even the way we were treated by the judges. So I think that sometimes you have to have some way to bring people in, or it's never going to happen.
Gotcha. We got your views on this particular point. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I mean, I want to cover a few other points too. I mean, if you have time. I mean, yeah, we would like to take your views on the another movement which is going on in the US, like the Black Lives Matter. So, what are your views and what do you say and how it should go? Yeah, your views on the Black Lives Matter, please.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I participated in civil rights marches when I was in high school in the 60s. And, so it seems to me almost like deja vu. And I do believe that there has been institutional racism in this country. But what we have to address, I definitely, some of the things that people are talking about, defund the police, however they define it. I just think that's, silly, frankly. I mean, it's very important. even for minority communities, that there be police. I think what we need to do is look at our justice system, um, and also look at other issues of economic inequality. That is ultimately, those two things are really key, and those are going to hopefully make the difference. And that's, in my opinion, a lot of this, and certainly relates to the justice system in some ways that there have been sort of standardized responses, and maybe more so to people of color, that have been inappropriate responses. And I do think that we need to have the kind of reform that allows, for example, California has recently changed this a little bit, but some independent review and some understanding that those officers who violate trust and violate the law should not be able to move from police department to police department without anybody knowing about it. It should be prohibited, like in any other job, where you can look into people's backgrounds, and if it turns out you're hiring an accountant and they have just defrauded their company, you're not going to want to hire them. So, I mean, I think those things are really important, but also it comes back to what we've been talking about. It comes back to a lot of the economic inequality that we need to remedy as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for your views on this. And this brings up another one. I mean, like the Second Amendment and the safety of the society. So, what are your views on the freedom to own a gun and also the safety? We have seen many incidents in our country uh, where gun
Right.
violence has taken many lives. So,
Well, I obviously, the Second Amendment is the Second Amendment, and the Supreme Court has clearly affirmed the right of people to own guns, and I don't disagree with that at all. I do think that we have to have common sense solutions, though, to some of the things that have happened. And for one thing, the incidents, I've been told by doctors that the incidence of suicide because of mental health issues now, people have easy access to guns when perhaps people who have some kind of history of their inability to think clearly about these issues should not be able to have guns. But also, I don't see any reason why those automatic weapons with the ability to kill, 10, 15 people in 5 seconds is what's needed for self-protection. And I really do believe that we need to have very thoughtful legislation that is going to prohibit the ownership of those kinds of weapons, and also to make sure that people keep the weapons they have safe, that they have to be safe in their cars so that it's not easy for people to steal them or easy for it to be utilized. So it's a combination. I mean, I live not that far from Gilroy. Little children were murdered here. That is just unacceptable. And that was an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old who bought those guns and killed those people and terrorized others.
so yeah, very sad incident, no doubt about it. And yes, and there are many other similar situations in the country. Very sad to hear all those things. Hopefully, things will. Everything which most of the cases are, as you said rightly, were connected to the some of them connected to the mental health. So, probably that's another thing which we need to address, and hopefully things will be addressed and be taken care. So, talking about California, when we talk about California, we talk about the tech companies and the Hollywood and other things. But at the same time, we have another topic, which is like environment, is another big thing in California. Let it be the earthquakes, or let it be the wildfires, or so. What are your views on the environmental issues in the California, and especially water issue? There's water resources on the scarce. What are your views on the environment in California, and what kind of policies
Yeah.
you would like to bring to the table? Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned before, and yes, you're right about water. Water is a huge issue here, and it will continue to be a huge issue here because the water table is diminishing, and California is a state that provides the most agricultural products to the rest of the country. So it's an issue of great importance, not just to us, but to the whole country, honestly. So, I mean, I think we need to be much more creative with regard to the water, to desalinate water because we're right at the ocean and other inland waterways. We should be, and there's already people starting to do this, but we should be doing the use of wastewater and cleaning it and using it in agriculture for sure. So we have to start thinking of creative technological solutions to make sure that we have sufficient water. And I know I believe I'm concerned deeply about environmentalism, and I'm concerned deeply about issues of toxins, for example, because as I mentioned, I did the lead paint case. I really am concerned about the effect of toxins in the air, in the water, and also just in our environment. And that is more so in more low-income communities and where people are working. And so I think our regulations need to be upgraded to assure that there is constant testing throughout the state to make sure that we are not above those levels. Although now you mentioned wildfires, I'm surrounded by wildfires where I am, and you can barely see the sky, much less the hills. So I'm sure the air quality is really terrible. And so we do have to do a lot more work in assuring that the surrounding areas, because there's a lot of open land that's forested in California, even if it's not densely forested, and that needs to be addressed really quickly. And we also, I mean, this is a little off the topic, but we also unfortunately do not have sufficient firefighting, uh, especially firefighters, because there was a time when they would utilize prisoners, but since COVID, many have been released from prison uh, because of COVID. And so there's no one or insufficient firefighting resources, which has allowed some of the fires to spread more. But I definitely, in our state, issues of the environment are crucial. And I think a lot of money, as I mentioned earlier, I think we have to get working on green jobs and investing in technologies that are going to assure more going from the issues that we now have with carbon emissions to, and I think the state's goal is 2035, and I think it's kind of too long. I think we've got to get moving to make changes in that as well.
Thank you very much for your views on all these topics. I mean, if anybody would like to be part of your campaign, I mean, how can they reach you? And any final words to the audience, please?
Yes. Well, I think let me say about final words to the audience. We have so many complicated issues in this country, and I think and state for sure. And I think what we need are people who are going to listen, who are going to talk to those of us and those of you who are concerned about different issues, because one person can't know them all, right? We only know them by talking to people who are affected, whether that be people in business or just people who are concerned about their schools and what's happening with their kids. You really need elected officials that are going to be responsive to you and listen to you and not just tell you what they think. Because the decisions that I make are based on observations, listening to people. It's based on facts. It's based on data. And that's how you can make good solutions. And it's right to make them. And it's not like I'm imitating the Biden campaign, but I think it's right to listen to all people. I just do. I don't think you can make decisions by just listening to the same people who either are your donors or are your friends. You have to listen to everybody. And I think that's what people should look for when they're looking to elect someone, no matter where you are. You may not agree on certain things, but if it's a person who's going to be empathetic, who's going to be concerned about how things are affecting you, that's what you want. That's really what you want. And that is what I would do, honestly. I'm not doing this because, as you have already heard my long history and work history, I don't really want to be a lifetime politician. I want to do things for my community, and that's why I'm doing it. And so thank you all for listening, and you can reach me at ANN. This is my personal email, and you could reach me here at ann.ravel@gmail.com. Or you can also go on my website, and it's ravelforca.com, and you can read more about me and about the positions I've taken and tell me what you disagree with, and I'm happy to talk to you about it. You could also contribute or volunteer. So anything that you're interested in doing, I would welcome.
Thank you very much for coming onto the show, Miss Ann Ravel, and we wish you all the best in the run. Okay, thank you. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
rest of
I
the day. Thank you.
appreciate it. Take care.